Okay, shalom aleichem, everybody. Okay, big sugya. Hope everybody survived. So what I'd like to focus on today is going into, let's see here, okay, into this machlokas Rabbi Yehuda for Rabbi Yossi of Erev Pesach and Erev Shabbos. So we have the basic machlokas Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi, if you can start eating Erev Shabbos after Teshuv and Mechzah. Okay, we'll talk about Pesach also, but the Ikar machlokas is really about Shabbos. We're here, and then the Gemara goes on and Daf Kuf to say that Rav Huna, who learned that the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Yossi, that the chiddush of the Mishnah is that Rabbi Yossi will agree to Rabbi Yehuda on Erev Pesach that you're not maschil to eat from Teshuv and Mechzah because we're worried about the chiyuv matzah, we spoke about last week, why matzah is different. Matzah is a ma'isa achila. So then the Gemara goes on to say that the Rav Huna minicha Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Rabbi Yochanan is Rav Huna's shot so pashat. Didn't Rabbi Yirmiyah say in the Rabbi Yochanan Itmei Rabbi Yavohu Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Halacha Rabbi Yehuda be'erev Pesach Halacha Rabbi Yossi be'erev Shabbos. So it says Halacha Rabbi Yehuda be'erev Pesach Machlal the Palig Rabbi Yossi b'tarvayu. If it says Halacha Rabbi Yehuda on Erev Pesach, it's mashma that Rabbi Yossi is cholak even on Erev Pesach and holds even on Erev Pesach you're allowed to eat chatchila on. What was that? People trying to get in. That even on Erev Pesach, Rabbi Yossi holds that you are allowed to eat chatchila after Tesha Mechza or after Tesha Shos, after 9 hours. So, what does Rav Huna mean that Rabbi Yossi agrees to Rabbi Yehuda on Erev Pesach? So the Gemara says lo, and this is very important. This is I want to focus on these lines of the Gemara because it really opens up the whole sugya. Lo, halacha mechlal the pligi b'afsaka. The halacha is like Rav Yehuda on Erev Pesach, and Rabbi Yossi doesn't disagree with that. He agrees that you are allowed. The pasuk pshat in the Gemara is that he agrees that you're now allowed to start eating on Erev Pesach to Rabbi Yehuda, but there's still a machlokas by hafsaka. If you do start eating on Erev Pesach, do you need to stop once Pesach comes in? You need to stop by hafsaka. The Tanya, because learning in a brisa, mafsikin the shabbos to Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda holds that even by Shabbos, if you start eating, now you have to be mafsik if the Suda goes on. Mafsikin, but the Shabbosos. Rabbi Yossi Omer ain't mafsikin. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you do not have to be mafsik on Erev Shabbos. You started eating on Erev Shabbos. The Shabbos, when did you start eating Erev Shabbos? That's going to be part of our discussion. But if you started eating on Erev Shabbos and your Suda runs into Shabbos, ain't mafsikin. You do not need to stop. Now, Pashtus, mafsikin means, the Rashbam says, and Tosafos says that mafsikin means ba'akiras shulchan. You have to be okar the shulchan and stop the Suda and bench. So according to beauty, actually bench, make kiddush, and then come back and make new motzi and everything to start. So you're basically ending the old Suda and starting a new Suda. The shall be, what does Rabbi Yossi hold that you do? So Rabbi Yossi says, "Ein mafsikin." Rather, in Ma'aseh B'Shimon Gamliel, we know the Ma'aseh over here that happened that they were eating and they wanted to stop the Chavod of Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi said that you're going to cause a mistake in halacha. People are going to think that if we're sitting and we stop before Yehuda, that's the halacha. So you shouldn't do that. That's and Dafka they were continued eating to be kaveh the halacha like Rabbi Yossi, not like Rabbi Yehuda. There's a question in Rishonim whether Rabbi Yehuda was there or not. But most Rishonim seem to learn he was there. They wanted to do the chavoda because he was there, and and Mitzad is covered, and Rabbi Yossi said no, that covered will bring a toast on halacha. So they continued eating, despite the fact that Yehuda had to stop eating, and the Shitaso he had to stop and bench. So he stopped and benched, and they kept eating. Interesting mitzvah going on over there. Okay, so getting back to the Raya of the Gemara, this brisa that it says the Tanya Masikin the Shabbosos Rabbi Yehuda Riyosa Omer Ein Masikin. So the question is, what are we talking about over here? Are we the discussion between Rabbi Yehuda and this brisa between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi starts off being about Shabbos. The question is the entire discussion about Shabbos or not? So we have a major machlokas here between, and so we'll start with Pasuk Pshat, and then we're going to see how behind the Pasuk Pshat there's a lot of depth going on over here. That Tosas brings down. Tosas is Goris Kidatanya, not Ditanya. It's similar to this brisa, but not. There's nothing explicit in this brisa, because the shaila of the Gemara was to say that Rabbi Yossi is cholik b'afsaka, is talking about Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach, right? I hope everybody has a Gemara, because it's going to get a little complicated. We're going to have to really hold cup over here to try to hold on to this discussion. So the discussion we were having at the Gemara was to say that Rabbi Yossi's moda on Erev Pesach or not. We're saying no, he's not moda. He is moda in Erev Pesach, but there's still a machlokas by hafsaka. And then we bring a brisa that has nothing to do with Pesach, has to do with Shabbos. Do we see a machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi about hafsaka, not on Erev Pesach, but on Erev Shabbos, because that's what the brisa is talking about. So that's why Tosafos says that we can't be Goris Ditanya, because the brisa is not discussing what we were talking about. So it's not Ditanya that we learned, but it's Kidatanya, like that we learned, because we're making a comparison between Erev Shabbos and Erev Pesach, according to Tosafos. And we want to say a chiddush that just like Rabbi Yossi is cholik on Erev Shabbos, is also cholik on Erev Pesach. That's how Tosafos learns the brisa, how the raya from the brisa. But he says that Amoyer ben Yechiel Amar Dekaras Titania.
When he says Kimlay, it's just like is it kind of like an Ukimta type of, not Ukimta, not Smachta type of thing, like where he happens to know, he's saying that the same way, like what does that mean, the Kimlay? Just that he knows that it's not really a riot.
No, it's just we just know that just like there's a malchus there, we know there's a malchus over here. Kimlay, either Kimlay that we thought he knew it, or he had a Kabbalah like that, or something like that. But it can't be talking about the same thing. But he says, however, Ben Yechiel Amar Dekaras Titania, that he's nidchak, he wants to be dochek in the simple shot in the brisa to say that we do stay with the Gersa Titania. The diek, the Kamar Yossi ein mafsikin, hainu afilu erev Pesach, de maschilin. It has to be that Rabbi Yossi, even though he's answering Rabbi Yehuda's taina of Erev Shabbos, but he was answering back about Erev Pesach directly. And it must be that he's been kolel in his answer also Erev Pesach. Why? Because Erev Shabbos, there's no need to say masikin. There's never pashat she'em masikin. If you hold maskilin, you hold your allowed to start, then there's a never pashat that you don't have to masik. Like it says inside, it must be talking about Erev Pesach. He agrees you're not allowed to start. Only there's a reason to have to tell us that in Masikin. The Erev Shabbos, Shar Rabbi Yossi, Afil Haskell. Because it can't be talking about Erev Shabbos, Rabbi Yossi only, because on Erev Shabbos, if he tells you're allowed to start, then obviously you don't have to stop.
Why is that true?
Oh, why is that true? So that's what we really need to talk about. So, okay, that's really going to be the crux of our discussion today. Why is that true? So now, but just first of all, in Pasuk Shat in Rabbeinu Yechiel, that basically Rabbeinu Yechiel is saying that it must be talking about Erev Pesach because there's no hechetimtza, there's no possibility that it could be talking about Shabbos. We don't have any hechetimtza on Erev Shabbos that there should be a need to tell us in Masikin. That's the time of Rabbi Yechiel. Okay, Fekter B'Kiveger, Gilin Ashas, right there on the page says on that, Kashali. This Rabbi Yechiel is difficult. Ha, Rabbi Yossi Omer De'in Masikin Afilu Achar Shetachshach. The Haskell Aser Kodem Kiddush V'Komakam in Masikin. Rabbi Yossi does have a hechetimsa on Shabbos. That if you would start eating after Chashecha, after nightfall, before Kiddush, so that there Rabbi Yossi is moda that you're not allowed to start. Everyone agrees you're not allowed to start eating after Chashecha before Kiddush. Our whole machlokas in the Gemara is only about if you started the Hetzer, you started an Erev Shabbos eating, you have to stop or not. But everyone agrees that you for sure cannot start at that point. And still, Rabbi Kiveger says, they're also in Masikin. The Tzarech even. So therefore, the Rabbi Yechiel is difficult because you should still need to say Kiddatanya, like Tosas. You can only say Ditanya if the Brisa has to be talking about Erev Pesach, because you don't have a hechetimtza, you don't have a possibility that it's talking about Shabbos. So you're forced to say it's talking about Erev Pesach, even though you're taking it out of its Pasha context, because the discussions seem to be only about Shabbos, but you're forced to say Erev Pesach. But if you have a hechetimtza, you have a possibility, you have a case on Shabbos itself, you're not allowed to start. But Rabbi Yossi would agree that you don't have to stop. So then you're not allowed to say that this Bryce is talking about Pesach. You can be talking about Shabbos, like the Pasuk Shad in the Bryce is. That's on the surface what Rikiveger is asking. That's just mitzad hapshat. Now, the Rashash in the back of the Gemara learn the Rashash. Right here on this Tosas. Okay, if everybody has it, it's Tosas der Maska Mechlal. Mori Rabbi Yechiel. You all have that? No. A lot of the new Gemaras are different where they put it. Wait a second on that. Sam, Derek, let us see you guys. Derek, I don't want to see your marijuana. I really want to see you.
Hey, Rabbi, there's sunflowers. There's sunflowers, Rabbi.
I figure you're in California, you know, so that's. Somebody once said, Rabbi Fried, if you really want to make money for the kolos, you should get involved in the legal marijuana trade under the kolo. I said, that'd be great. We can call it the Joint Distribution Committee. Okay. California joke. Okay. So, everybody got the Rashash? Rashash says the following. He says, Ein Kushas Gillian Ashas. Look at the Kasha of Rabbi Kiveger. The Tema, Shekvar Kadmo Harash Bazeh, B'Shem Rabbi Yeshaya Ashitas Harash Rabbi Yonah, I'm sorry, Ashitas Rishaya Mitrani Shikadivrei Hareni Yechiel ve'Haviu gam hamarsha. Okay, so first of all, he's saying that the kasha Rikneger is asking on Rabbeinu Yechiel, it's not a new kasha. It's really the same kasha that the Rosh and then Rabbeinu Yonah asked on Yishai Midratrani. So to understand that, we take a quick look at the Rosh we had in Marmakomos. The Rosh says, here. The Rosh brings down the halachas of Dolas, the Bahag, who says that Mitesha shows Solamaila, the Arab Yom Tava, lo misper the Inish mischil v'sudasa. The person is not allowed to start eating the halacha l'maisa from the 9th hour of the day. Afilu Reb Yossi lo amar ela askel lo mafsik, alatchila lo haskel. So the Bahag says that even Reb Yossi that says that says his kula, that's only the gabe hafsaka, but Reb Yossi agrees you're not allowed to start eating on Erev Shabbos. Va'alesa, that's not true. Da'amrina b'shmaiten elahadik tani b'shavin shmaschilin imasa iba shavasasim tovim muflik pligi amud Reb Yossi shari av haskal. It's not true that Reb Yossi says his din even the gabe haskala. Only Erev Pesach, the Gemara says he's motive you can't start, but he agrees on but he disagrees on Erev Shabbos. You're allowed to be maskil on Erev Shabbos. Then he goes on to say, Rabbi Shayim and Atrani hevi raya ledivri halachas dolos mid istrich le Rabbi Yochanan lifso halacha Rabbi Yossi Erev Shabbos lafsaka. Rabbi Shayim wanted to bring a raya to the Bahag that you're not allowed to start eating on Erev Shabbos from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan needed a pascha in the halacha like Rabbi Yossi Gabi Hafsaka. The fact that he needs to say you don't have to be mafsik. It must be that Rabbi Yochanan does not hold like Rabbi Yossi Gabi Haskala. The savar kavasei hashta lahaskal shari kolshken she'en tzarich lahafsik. If you're allowed to start eating on Erev Shabbos, kolshken that you don't have to be mafsik. If you're allowed to mamish start eating, then of course you don't have to be mafsik. It's a kolshken. You see that Rabbi Yochanan only paskin like Rabbi Yossi legabe hafsaka and not legabe haskala. So you see that the halacha is like the Bahag from Rabbi Yochanan's din. The fact that Rabbi Yochanan has to tell us masikin, that tells us Rabbi Yochanan that the Bahag is right that you're not allowed to be maskil. Otherwise, you have no reason to tell us that you don't have to be mafsik. There's no reason to even tell us that if you're allowed to start. Says the Rosh on that, that's not true. You can't tikshilach Rabbi Yossi Gufei. Ma'isтрich le'lashmina de'emasikin. Hashta schule maskilin apsikin boy. Then Minei Ubei, then you're saying Rabbi Yossi doesn't make any sense. Minei Ubei. Rabbi Yossi said you're allowed to be. Rabbi Yossi himself, you agree. Rabbi Yossi says you're allowed to start. Rabbi Yossi for sure says maskilin. Just a question: how does Rabbi Yochanan paskin? But Rabbi Yossi himself for sure says maskilin. You're allowed to start eating at Erev Shabbos. So why would Rabbi Yossi have to tell us in the Brisa that ein mafsikin? It's a davar pashut according to you that ein mafsikin if you're allowed to start. Ela vadai k'mo shepirish ri. I think it's the trei milininu. It's for sure like I think it means the Riantosis that there's two separate shilas. The shilah maschilin and mafsikin is not part and parcel with the same shilah. It's two separate nidonim. It's two separate shilas. Trei milininu. The efshar, the avagav, the shari of Yossi, the haskil. It's possible to entertain the thought, entertain the possibility that Yossi, even though he says you're allowed to start, what's the issue with starting to eat? It's like we said in the previous Gemara, the beginning of the Mishnah, that the whole problem not to start eating on Erev Shabbos would be, are you worried about going into Shabbos when you're to'ev lechol or not? Are you worried about Suda Shabbos to eat it b'te'ovan? And that we said that Rabbi Yossi is koshish for te'avon on Erev Pesach is a mitzvah b'chila, and Erev Shabbos is not worried about the possibility of not eating b'te'avon. So that's one shiloh. The first shiloh is eating b'te'avon, and that's the shiloh of maschilin. And even if you hold, even though you might hold that it's mutter to be maskil, you're not worried about shutayev. You still might be that even though you're allowed to start eating, once Shabbos comes in, then you might have to still stop because of kavod Shabbos. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a tekiah in kavod Shabbos just to continue eating and not stop and do something l'chavod Shabbos for this meal. So there's two completely separate shilas: the shilah of maschilin and shilah of masikin. Hilkach. Therefore, the Rosh says, "Avar after Rabbi Yochanan savar Rabbi Yossi b'aschala." Even though Rabbi Yochanan does hold like Rabbi Yossi b'aschala, not like the Bahag that Rabbi Yochanan for sure paskins that you're not allowed to start according to Rabbi Yossi. No, I disagree. The Rabbi Yochanan for sure holds like Rabbi Yossi you're allowed to start. Still, you would need to tell us that you paskin like Rabbi Yossi by hafsaka, because I might have entertained the possibility that I'll be mekel legabi haskala, but I'll be machmir legabi hafsaka. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan has to tell us that we're mekel by both. V'chen pasku Rashbam, the Rashbam and Tosfos both say the mutar the haskal the suda be'erev Shabbos asher techshach.
Why does Rabbi Yossi? Why does the Rosh go on to this idea of like the Chavod Shabbos? Why doesn't it say it's a problem of eating before Kiddush?
So okay, good question, and that's sort of leads us into the sugya here. So the problem of eating before Kiddush seems that we see from the sugya is only a problem if you start eating before Kiddush. If you're mamshech lechol, so you're not starting your achila before Kiddush, then that for some reason that's not a problem before Kiddush. And the pashup shot would be is that if you're not eating and suddenly it's time to make Kiddush and you're supposed to make Kiddush and you don't, then it's possible that that's an inyan of zilzul and Kiddush. It's a pegia or a zilzul, we'll call it in kavod Shabbos, or in the chelik of kavod Shabbos will be in that you're supposed to make Kiddush and mark the fact that it's Shabbos. You're not. Instead, you're fressing away. You're starting to eat. But if you already were eating before, so then it's a hemshech achila is not such a begia or in kavod Shabbos. At least that's what will come out halacha l'maisa. The Rosh is saying that you might have thought that there would be room to say that even the gabi haskal, if you started beheter, still there would be a reason to think that. And kamash malan, that's why Rabbi Yossi has to tell us a chiddush. Rabbi Yossi himself and Rabbi Yochanan as well, but have to say that the halacha Rabbi Yossi the gabi hafsaka to tell us exactly that chiddush. That don't think that the same pegia applies to starting to eat would apply to continuing to eat. Rather, that's not a pegia anymore. That's precisely the point. So now we see that the Rosh's kasha on the Rebbeinu Yeshaya again. So just to chazor, the Rebbeinu Yeshaya held that if you're allowed to be maskel, kosher ken, you don't have to be mafsik. So the Rebbeinu Yeshaya is holding that the inyan of haskala and hafsaka are all one din. It's just two sides of one coin. There aren't two din going on. There's one din, one coin. We're just looking at two sides of it. One side is the beginning. One side is the hemshech to continue eating. That's the Rebbeinu Yeshaya, and therefore he held that if maschilin, which he holds that maschilin is more chamer than mafsikin, why would that be more chamer? Why would it be a kosher? Why don't you say that maybe you can eat a few hours before, but you can't eat right now? So that perhaps you could say, I found actually the Chiddush Rebbeinu David does say this, is that it's more of a chumrah, more of a problem to be maskil than it is to be mamshich, because the to be maskil, you might fill yourself up, like Tosha said before about matzah, that if what you do at the shas suda, you're more in control of, because right now you're involved in that suda, right at the time of it, you're supposed to be involved in it. So when you start hours before, you might think that there we talked about as far as being ta'ev lechel, about worried about being too full for your suda Shabbos. So you're to be maskil hours before, you think you have a lot of time, so you can press away and think you'll be fine till then. And lo and behold, you got so filled up you can't eat another morsel by the time Shabbos comes. But when it's already the time of Shabbos to be mafsik now, because now you're worried about being able to make kiddush and still have some geshmak in it, whatever. So that's even, it's less problematic b'shas the meal than it is earlier than the meal, like Tosa said previously. So that's why there's a kol sheken. If you can be maskil, kol sheken, you don't have to be mafsik. You're going to keep on eating l'chavod Shabbos. That's the svora of the Rebbeinu Yeshaya. But the Rosh says no. That would be good if the whole issue was about whether you're going to be full or not. If the whole issue is about Tayav Lechel, it's all one issue. But if that's not the issue at all, the issue is the Erev Shabbos, it's an issue of Tayav Lechel. Now it's a separate issue of Kavod Shabbos, of Kiddush. It's a whole separate Indian. So you don't have any kol sheken. There's no kol sheken to say that if I could start, then I don't have to stop now. Mechatesi, it's apples and oranges. No shaykhut between the two. So I have to tell us both chidushim separately. That's the time of the rush on Rebbeinu Yeshaya. So, and that enables the rush to say that we paskin, not like the Bahag, we paskin, you're allowed to be maskil. And still, we had to tell us, we needed to hear the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan, you also don't have to be mafsik. That was the gist of the rush. So now getting back to the Rashash is saying that Rabbi Kiveger's kasha on Rebbeinu Yechiel is essentially already the kasha of the rush on the Rebbeinu Yeshaya. The question is, how does the Rashash see that in Rabbi Kiveger's kasha? So this takes us deeper into the sugya. Looking back into the sugya itself, into the Tosfos. So we actually have Rebbeinu Yechiel twice in the sugya. We have Rebbeinu Yechiel in the first Tosfos, that whether you're gorish to Tanya or not Kedatanya, or Kedatanya. Then you have another Tosfos where it says Ein Mafsikin. The question of Ein Mafsikin, Tosfos says, B'yischila b'heter ayri. When Rabbi Yossi says the din Ein Mafsikin, we're talking about where you started eating b'heter. B'yischila b'isser, motor Rabbi Yossi de Mafsikin. If you started eating b'isser, even Rabbi Yossi agrees that we're Mafsikin. Okay, so now first of all, so Tosfos, let's get this really clear. Tosfos says telling us clearly that the only time Rabbi Yossi says that in Mafsikin is only when you start mamish beheter. And it happens to be that the Pashtus, Erev Shabbos is always beheter. There is no time that's be'isser according to Rabbi Yossi. Not so clear, but now further down in Tosfos it says, Umoy Rebbeinu Yechiel Omer, V'da Pasuk Rabbi Yossi Bat Saka, U'uvda Michlad Hatchil Lo Kal Mon Kavasei. If Rebbeinu Yechiel says that since Rabbi Yochanan needed to come and paskin like Rabbi Yossi, as far as Hasaka, you don't have to be mafsik, we see that L'chatchila Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold like him. Does this sound familiar? Rebbeinu Yechiel is exactly saying the taina of Rebbeinu Yeshaya in the Rush. Rebbeinu Yechiel is saying that these two things are tied to each other. That if you are allowed to be maskil, then like Rebbeinu Yeshaya said, the kol sheken, you do not have to be mafsik. So Rebbeinu Yechiel is that shita of the Rebbeinu Yeshaya, exactly what he said. And it comes out there a very basic machlokas between Tosfos and Rebbeinu Yechiel over here in this second Tosfos. Rebbeinu Yechiel is saying that the din of Yossi was said even when you started B'Isser, because if you didn't start B'Isser, there's no need to tell us this din. So the example of that would be, the Pashut example is Erev Pesach. The Rebbe Yossi agrees you're not allowed to start eating, and even so, he says Ein Mafsikin. That's the basic din of Rebbe Yossi that we're coming to speak out. So, and who would din on Erev Shabbos? There happens not to be, seems not to be a hechatimtza like that. But if there would be a hechatimtza on Erev Shabbos, there's an Isser, then that would be where you would need to tell us Ein Mafsikin. Just the Ikra Chiddush will be an Erev Pesach. But Tosfos, however, disagrees. Tosfos says that Rav Yossi only says his din of ein masikin when you started beheter. Only when you started beheter. So, because if you started be'isr, it's pasha that the Rav Yossi agrees to Rav Yehuda that you are mafsik.
Why would that be? Why would that be pasha? If the whole idea is that it's only a problem because of Kavod Shabbos, and the guy started be'isr, so that's one thing. But now, when it comes to the actual kiddush, where's the lack of? If you say that mafsikin is that, if you say that once you've started a meal, it's not a problem for your Kavod Shabbos. So what difference does it matter if I started my meal beheter or be'isr? Once the meal started, so now it's not like I don't have to interrupt my meal for kiddush, but to start a meal, like according to like Rabbi Akiva Eger's case, that case I would see there's like a problem for the Kavod Shabbos. But if I'm starting my meal at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon before Shabbos, and according to the Shita that it's Aser, why would that be a problem?
Oh, good question. Very good. So we have to say that when is it not considered a Pegiyah in the Kavod of Shabbos or not a Zilzal Kiddush to continue eating right into Shabbos when you started before? That's if you started Mamish Beheter. It's completely starting Beheter, and so then you since you started with no Pegiyah of Shabbos to begin with, so then it's not the Pegiyah of Shabbos to continue that meal that had no. You go after the Haskalah. If the start Haskalah had no clash with the Kavod of Shabbos, then it continues not to be clashing with Kavod Shabbos to finish off that Suda. However, if you started at a time that already was a Pegiyah and Kavod Shabbos, in some respect, so then to continue eating when you get to the Zman Kiddush, then that Achila, you're not for care. You go after the beginning of the meal, which already was clashing in some way with Kavod Shabbos, and therefore it continues to clash with Kavod Shabbos, so there would have to be Mafsikin. Then you would not be allowed to continue because now your mom is being Pokea of Kavod Shabbos. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're saying it basically just magnifies whatever your original status was. So if you started beheter, then the fact that it's now time for kiddush doesn't change anything. It's just magnifying that you started in a heter fashion. There's no problem for Shabbos. You held Shabbos as something chashav. But if you started be'isr, then you were already from the beginning saying you don't care about Shabbos. So now when you're continuing your meal, that itself is a lack of kavod Shabbos because it's just magnifying your original what you did. It makes sense.
That's a good way to say it. Yeah.
How
It's
does this Rabbi understand that? If you're pogen kavod, like it makes it into like a technicality. If you started beheter, like if it's a pegi and kavod Shabbos, it's a pegi and kavod Shabbos. I thought Chazal just gave us like parameters of what's when you have to be careful. You have like your road signs. As you come to Shabbos, you have to be careful that when you come to Shabbos, you're gonna like even if you started the heter, when it comes to a certain zman, wouldn't Svara say that you could still be pogea and kavod Shabbos no matter how you started?
Chazal felt that that is not a pia. That's as long as you started at time, you took Shabbos into consideration. So we go after the haskalah. You're allowed to just continue what you're doing. So that haskalah was out of respect of Shabbos, not pia and Shabbos. Then the hemshach of that meal also just doesn't become pia and kavod Shabbos.
So what's the pigiyah? The pigiyah is that you're going to come in not hungry, or the pigiyah is you're going to forget about like what? How do you define the pigiyah then?
Oh, very good point. So that's I think okay. So hold that question. That's what we'll get to try to understand. What you're bringing up right now is really going to be the studim over here to understand the machlokes rishonim that's going on. So before we get to that, you're saying a very good point. Let's take this back now. Once we see this second Tosfos, so now we're trying to understand how does the Rashash see in Rabbi Yehuda's kasha the same kasha as the rush. It seemed like Rabbi Yeager is asking a technical question that how can you say there's no hekatimtza on Shabbos? There is a hekatimtza. There's a possibility on Shabbos that you're not allowed to eat. That Rabbi Yossi would agree you're not allowed to eat. Even so, you would not have to stop. So the Rashash is saying that kasha is essentially the kasha that the Rosh was asking on the Rebbeinu Yeshaya, that it's two separate dinim. So I think what he means to say is that Bishlema, if you would see that, like for Shabbos, there is no situation that of Isser, of Haskala. There's no time you can be maskil. There's no time that it's usher to be maskil. So then you're able to say that the din haskala and the din hafsaka is all one din, and say that and be able to say you can only say a kol sheken if the issue, if the matter that we're discussing is all really one matter, which would be the haskala and the hafsaka. It's all really one sugya, one matter, one issue, one inyan. So then you're able to say a kol sheken because it's apples and apples. But if it's two separate inyanim, then it's apples and oranges. So you have no kol sheken. The kol sheken falls off. So Rabbi Yeager says that since I can find a hechatimtza that you are not allowed to start eating, even according to Rabbi Yossi on Shabbos, and even so, Rabbi Yossi is holding that you would not have to be mafsik, then that shows us clearly that it's two separate inyanim. Haskala and hafsaka are two different inyanim. It's not the same inyan. Once it's not the same inyan, you don't have a kol sheken anymore. And then the second Rebbeinu Yechiel falls off in the second Tosfos. So we'll take it a step further. And I hope it asks, stop me if it's not being clear. What I'm saying is not clear. That where does Rabbi Yeager know that? Where's Rabbi Yeager coming from to make an assumption that Rabbi Yossi would agree that it's even in a case where you would start eating b'chashecha at night, where it's usher to start eating, you would not have to stop. Where does Rabbi Yeager know this from? So I think it's partially he knows it from the fact that Rabbi Yossi holds you're allowed to start eating. You're not allowed to start eating in Erev Pesach. There's an isser to start eating in Erev Pesach. Even so, Rabbi Yossi says ein mafsikin. That's good for what the Gemara is saying ein mafsikin. So we see that according to Rabbi Yossi, even in a case where you're not allowed to start eating, still ein mafsikin. Right? That's the foundational din of Rabbi Yossi. Even when you from Erev Pesach, you see that even when you can't start, still you do not need to stop. Okay, so now once you say that, then what's the difference between Erev Pesach you're not allowed to start and Mishach HaShecha, and after Friday night, after it gets dark, you're not allowed to start. By both you can't start, and by both, therefore, you don't have to stop. That's the assumption of Rabbi Yeager. And from that assumption, he's drawing from there a yesod. This is what the Rashash sees in Rabbi Yeager's seemingly technical taina, but it's really a deeper taina. That's the fact that even where you're not allowed to start, still in maskilin, still you don't have to stop. You see that maskilin and masikin are two separate dinim, the two separate halachas, two separate dinim, and therefore there's no kol sheken. And so the whole argument of Rabbi Yechiel falls apart. That's what Rabbi Yeager tainas. So on that the Rashash says, look back to the Rashash. On that the Rashash says, L'yashiv shitasam nirali desfirlu de behiska beheter lekuli alma enu posek afilu lederaisa. I am Ran perakama de Shabbos v'sugya de l'yoshun lefnei asapar. L'chen shaper muchach in istruch l'misak Rabbi Yossi v'erev Shabbos erev Yom Tov de'enu mafsik mechlal de'enu mafsik mechlal de'en maschilin. De behiska b'chashecha the Rashash says the following, that, and this I think is a beautiful, I was thinking this on my own, and then I see that the Rashash is saying, look, I can't see you guys. Not to see you guys. Yeah, great. Okay. He's saying the following. This is a really beautiful thing. This is what you're asking. Yes, you're asking before that. Okay, there's a Ran. The Ran that we mentioned last time, or one of these times I mentioned the Ran, says that the Ran in Shabbos and the Sugya and Daf Tes over there, that there we have a Sugya of Ein Yoshvim Lefnei Sapar Lefnei Mincha. You're not allowed to start getting a haircut once it's already this man of Mincha Aktana. It's close to the time of Mincha. You can't start getting a haircut. And there's a whole long list of things that you can't do, can't start doing when it's time to daven Mincha. However, it says over there that in Hiskil, if you started, even though you shouldn't have, you started in Masikin. We don't force them to stop as long as there's Shos Piyam, as long as there's enough time left, let's say after the haircut to still daven Mincha. Once you started, then you're allowed to continue. So the Gemara over there, without going through the whole sugya, over there in the Gemara in Sukkah, similar sugya in Sukkah, Daf Lamed Ches, the Gabi Lulav. If you didn't take a Lulav yet, and you started eating, so it says you take the Lulav al Shulchano. You have to stop and put it on, take it on your table. So you do have to mafsik take a Lulav. So the Gemara is B'chala between Derabanan and Deraisa. That by Derabanan, let's say the Xer Derabanan, Davening Mincha, so you're not allowed to start. But if you started in Mafsikin, by Deraisa, yes, Mafsikin, you do have to stop. That's why you have to stop your meal to take your lulav, because it's talking about a mitzvah. We're talking about the first day of Sukkot, where it's a mitzvah Deraisa to take the lulav. That's the chiluk in the Gemara. So the Ran over there, in both places actually, the Ran brings a raya from our sugya that if you start beheter, that even by deraisa in masikin, you don't have to stop even by a deraisa, because he says making kiddush Friday night is deraisa, and we pass on like Yossi that in hischil beheter in masikin. So the dafka of hischil beheter, maybe you're going to forget kiddush. We're not worried about that. You started beheter, then the gzera goes off. That is the only time you would have a problem is if you started the Isser. But if you, because then you're worried about Kiddush. Kiddush is the Raisa. But if you started the Heter, then it's okay. So that Ran, you see, is putting the context of our Sugya is taking our Sugya, basically, the fact that it's a Raya from our Sugya to that Sugya over there, we see the Ran is holding that it's all really one Sugya of Gzeras. That the Sugya over here, the issue over here, the problem over here is it could be a Gzera of the Suda Shabbos or a Gzera of forgetting Kiddush. It's basically all one Inyan. It's all one Sugya. And if Rabbi Yossi holds that, and if there would be a case of Maschilim, in case you're allowed to be Maslo Beheter, so then, just like the Ran says over there, from Araya from our Sugya, that if there's Maschilin, then there's no Gzera of Masikin. That the Gzera of Masikin over there in Daf Tes and Shabbos and Lamaches and Sukkah, that Sugya tells us that the whole din of Masikin depends upon the din of Maschilin. Because within the realm of Gzeras, it's all one big Gzera. So that's why the Rebbeinu Yechiel and Rebbeinu Yeshaya are bringing a Kosaken from Maschilin to Masikin, because they hold that it's all within that sugya of that one big sugya of Gzeras. Masha Enken, the Rush is cholak on that. The Rush holds no, it's not. He's cholak on that Ran. Our sugya is not a raya to there. It's not a raya to there because there's two separate yanim going on. You cannot bring a raya from our sugya to that sugya over there because our sugya has two separate things going on. It's not the sugya of Gzeras. Sugya Gzeras is the beginning as Haskalah. Yes, that might be a Gzera. But when it comes to Shabbos coming in, there's a whole separate Shaila that's not discussed in the Gzera, which is Kavod Shabbos, which would be starting the Suda L'Kavod Shabbos with Kiddush. And that might create a din of Masikin. So Rabbi Kiveger holds according to the Rebbeinu Yechiel that he should not be machalik between Erev Pesach and starting Erev Pesach B'Isser and starting in Leil Shabbos B'Isser. By both, you're not allowed to start, and you do not have to stop. But the Rashash says no. The Rabbi Yossi is moda by that you're not allowed to start on Leil Shabbos. In the same way you can't start, you also would have to stop. Now, according to the Rashash, he says the whole Rabbi Kivega's whole hanacha is not true. His assumption in Rabbi Yechiel is not true. You can't bring a raya from Erev Pesach that he holds in Masikin if you start B'Isser to Friday night if you start B'Isser that you don't have to be Masik. The Rashash says it's not true. Why? What will be the svara to Mechalik? So I think it's a Pasha svara that according to Rabbi Yechiel, the whole issue of Maschilin when it's Erev, when it's earlier on, is clearly Indian of Xeras. Either Xera of you're gonna not have taiva, you're not gonna be hungry, etc. But to start eating to begin with on Leil Shabbos when it's the Zman of Kiddush, besides a Xera, you might forget Kiddush, there's a whole other Indian over here that even Rabbi Yechiel will agree there's an Indian of Kavod Shabbos. Besides that it's a Pegia in Kiddush, and a Pegia in Kavod Shabbos, the Bisman that you're supposed to be making Kiddush, then you're starting to eat. And unlike the Indian of Xera, which it's an overall Xera on the overall totality of the Suda, in this case, every single bite that you take, every single bite is another Pegia in Kavod Shabbos. Every bite you take is a time that you should be making Kiddush and eating Kavod Shabbos, and instead you're eating for your own Kavod because you started eating at that time. So that's why the Rashash assumes that Rabbi Yossi will agree at that time that there is a problem. Taking a step back, let's take a step back for a minute. That just to try to understand the machlokas, and this is we're saying before, to getting back to the essential machlokas between the Rosh and the Rebbeinu Yeshaya, which will be the machlokas now between the Rebbeinu Yechiel and the Tosfos, and this whole that the Rebbeinu Yeshaya and Rebbeinu Yechiel hold that once you start beheter, there's clearly no problem with Kavod Shabbos. There's no issue of Kavod Shabbos, and whereas the Rosh holds that there is a problem with Kavod Shabbos. So I think that to understand this, so we have to go back into the Indian of Isra Chila on Erev Shabbos. We're not going to go into this really to the end, but just to mention at least two studim that are over here. In our sugya, we find that in the beginning of the sugya, when the Gemara is comparing Erev Pesach to Erev Shabbos, so in the Rashbam you see clearly over there in the Rashbam and Tosas that the whole issue that was raised in the sugya was an Indian of eating k'shu ta'ev lechel, and we're concerned that you're going to eat when you still have taiva, when you have a geshmak, when you have a ratzon to be able to eat. That was the only issue that was raised. That is one issue. However, there's a sugya in Gittin, and there are other sugya as well that raise this whole separate question that's not mentioned in our sugya at all, which is zilzal and kavod Shabbos to eat on Erev Shabbos. There's a Gemara in Gittin that talks about there's a mishpacha shenekra, there's a mishpacha that was wiped out because they're a wealthy family and they used to be kaveh a big suda on Erev Shabbos, like they would do it like every day, make a big suda. It was considered a pkia and kavod Shabbos, a zilzal and kavod Shabbos. The Rishonim explain over there to have done so, to be eating on Erev Shabbos like that. So, besides the let's say the technical issue of whether you're going to be full or have room to eat your Suda Shabbos, just the very fact of sitting in Kaveya Suda on Erev Shabbos is a problem with Zilzal and Kavod Shabbos. At least some Rishonim learn that way. The Rambam, when he brings down this halacha of that Gemara in Gittin, when the Rambam brings it down about not being Kaveya Suda on Erev Shabbos, he doesn't bring it in the sugya of in the halachas of Oneg Shabbos, which if the whole issue was that it's going to be pogea in your Oneg Shabbos, the Rambam should have brought that down in the halachas of Oneg Shabbos. Rather, the Rambam brought it down in halachas of Kavod Shabbos. together with the other halachas you have to do to be mechaber the Shabbos before Shabbos. The Brisker Rav basically says that the Iker Indian of Onik Shabbos is on Shabbos, and most of the halachas of Kavod Shabbos are before Shabbos, like getting candles ready, changing, taking a shower, getting shower clothes on, getting the table ready, getting the house ready. Those are dinei Kavod Shabbos, which are all before Shabbos. So the Rambam includes in those dinim also not to eat a suda on Erev Shabbos, which is the din of Kavod Shabbos, and if you do, then it's a begia and it's a zilzal in Kavod Shabbos. It's not just a restraining of your onig Shabbos because you're already full, but it's a pegia, it's a separate din Kavod Shabbos and zilzal Kavod Shabbos. So it's possible that that's really what's going on over here, is that the Raveni Yechiel and the Raveni Yeshaya that hold this one din is because they're going with what it says in our straight up with our sugya. Our sugya only mentions the Indian of the Suda, which is whether you're going to eat the Suda full or you're going to have taiva, have a geshmak to want to eat the Suda Shabbos. And there we have the chilukim we saw like in Tosas that there's more of a problem earlier in Erev Shabbos, but on Shabbos itself, once it comes in, once you're already eating, then you'll be able to restrain yourself, not eat too much to be able to eat on Shabbos itself with enough gusto or with enough geshmak. So they're all talking within the realm of being full or not, as far as the to'ev lechel of the Suda Shabbos. They don't mention anything at all about zilzal of Shabbos. So within that realm, the gzera of whether you might eat too much or not is really all one din. The din of maschilin and masikin all are within the same sugya of not eating too much and be able to eat the Suda Shabbos properly. But the rush that interjects a whole new Indian of Kavod Shabbos, the rush seems to be interjecting that besides that, there's another problem of zilzal in Kavod Shabbos. Like that Rambam, like that Sugi and Gittin. It's a whole separate Indian. And that will turn it into creating a situation that you have two separate nidonim, two separate dinim going on. There's the Achila and Erev Shabbos, which is an issue of To'ev Lechel, like the Gemara says. And then there's the issue of Masikin, which the Rush holds that there was a Havamina to say that possibly, or more than a Havamina, Rabbi Yehuda says Masikin, because he holds that it's a zilzal in Kavod Shabbos. You must stop and be Mekados Kavod Shabbos. That would be a zilzal in Shabbos to continue eating. Mashenkin, the Rabbi Yossi, his chiddush is, that's why we need to tell us this chiddush, because I wouldn't have known it otherwise, that I would have thought that it's a zilzal to start eating, to be eating at that time. Kamash Malon, a chiddush of Rabbi Yossi, that as long as you started, you started before, so now you're mamshech lechel, you started a heter. So now the fact that it's a hemshech of a davar heter, the chiddush is that it's not a zilzal of Kavod Shabbos. We need to tell us that chiddush. According to the first shot of Rebbeinu Yechiel and the Rebbeinu Yeshai, we don't need to even tell us that chiddush. It's moving me'elav. I can start eating, where it's more of a problem of the Suda Shabbos than kol shekan. I don't have to stop because we're talking within one. It's apples and apples. According to the Rush and the other Shon and but Rikveger is tiny. It's apples and oranges. No, I could start eating. I'm only allowed to start eating beheter, like Tosa says, not be'isur. I can start eating only beheter, and only when I start beheter, then I can be mamshich. But taka, like if I start be'isur, if I was according to Tosas and according to the Rush, I would start be'isur, then I'm already being mizalzel on Kavod Shabbos. So then, for sure, when I get to this man kiddush, I can't be mamshich because then that's clearly a zilzal on Kavod Shabbos. So that's why they hold that there's two separate things going on, not one thing. So that's how the Rikveger's kasha really ties into this whole cheshbon within Rebbeinu Yechiel and the two Tosas in which all is, and the Shitas of Tosas that you have to start only beheter for every Rabbi Yossi's din. Not like Rebbeinu Yechiel that Rabbi Yossi's din applies even if you started be'isur, and that's what we see from Erev Pesach. And let's say according to the Tosas and the Rush, we have no raya from Erev Pesach. We'll have to say that Rabbi Yossi only said in Erev Pesach, a mafsikin, only if you started before the 9.5 hours, before the 9th hour of the day, you started mamach beheter. Only then Rabbi Yossi say mafsikin, a mafsikin. Because Rabbi Yossi would agree if you start later in the day, then you would have to stop. You started Bisman Isser, then there is no heter of any Masikin. So it comes out a huge Machlokes Rishonim on two sides of the coin over here. That on one side we have Tosas and the Rush and all those that hold that way, that the whole din of Rabbi Yossi was only said if you started beheter, because if you don't, then you're going to have besides the problem of Chila Suda, you have a problem of Zilzal and the covered Shabbos. It's a Begia and Kiddush, Begia and the Zilzal and covered Shabbos. Whereas according to the Rabbeinu Yechiel and the Rabbeinu Yeshaya, Rabbi Yossi doesn't even need to tell us as din if you started beheter, because that would take us back to the realm of the sugya in Shabbos Daf Tes and the Sukkah Daf Lamed and Lamed Ches, that all these gzeras that you started beheter, then there's no din mafsikin. It's all one din of the gzeras. It's not about coverage zol coverage Shabbos. It's about the din of the gzera of mafsikin.
Why is it a kosher cane then?
Pardon?
Why is it a kosher cane? If it's all part of one gezerah, why would we say kosher cane? It's not.
So I think the kol shken, as we said before, is based on the Tosas inside of Testament Bays, and that's we saw. And I saw this. I found it in Rabbeinu David that applies it to here. Is that it's more chamor to start on Erev Shabbos further away from Shabbos, because you might get filled up more because you're so far away. So it's more of an issue to start earlier before Shabbos than it is when you eat right before Shabbos. So that's why it becomes a kol sheken, I think.
I have to process that.
Yeah.
It's because I mean, Svarah, you can say it the other way also. Like, why is that? The closer you get, the more likely you are being pogea with Shabbos.
Yeah. So that already you can go back and we can send an email to Tosfos.
Right.
That says the opposite there. So and based on I was thinking to apply that here was a little bit of a stretch, but I saw the Chiddush Rabbeinu David explicitly applies the Svar Tosfos to here. To say that's why it's a kol sheken. Because
Right. No, right.
lots of that reason.
Right. The cash is on me, not Rabbeinu David. Sure. I'm saying like yeah. I have to wrap my mind around that.
It's counterintuitive, but they're telling us that that's okay. And it happens to be that you're in good company, because the Mishnah Berurah brings that Rov Achronim are cholik on that psak of Tosas. They hold that it is more chamer later on. But
yeah, but not because Mishnah Berurah agrees with my svara.
No, that is for Kirat. They say it's more chamer later, not earlier. The reason to be cholik. So you're in good company. But that is the svara of Tosas, though. So that gives us room to explain the Rishonim that say kol sheken, to say it with because of that svara.
So would you say that Rabbeinu David would hold that the gzera is an issue of more forgetting about Shabbos? It's not like not that you're going to come in like that you're not saying that is as far that you're going to come in hungry because you're going to forget.
Well, it's interesting that for the Ran, it's like the Ran sort of takes it out of the realm of our Pashut Pshat. Pashut Pshat over here, the issue is we're concerned about just being full, but the Ran talks about it in terms of the gzer. But he's trying to tie it to the sugya over there. He's talking about not like let's say why can't you not start eating when you're supposed to take a lulav? Because you might get so involved in your eating, you'll forget to take it. You'll come nightfall, you'll be involved in the mitzvah lulav. So the Ran is tying our sugya to there in terms of forgetting to make kiddush, of not making kiddush, because you're getting involved in your suda, and by the time you finish, you're gonna be hungry, you'll be full, you'll get tired, you'll fall asleep, you're not gonna make kiddush. So it's mitzad the kiddush, not just so there's like it comes like a third thing, but there's room to explain with the gzera, not in the Ram's terms of forgetting kiddush, but you can say that similar gzera as far as not being able to eat your Suda Shabbos because you're so full. So that's where Ben David seems to be learning. And that's why it's a kol sheken. If you can start eating earlier, then you can eat later, based on that Sora of Tosas that earlier is worse, not better.
I think I understand part of it, so we'll work on it.
Okay, very good.
All right, have a good Shabbos.
This is an unusually complicated cheshbon over here, but it's very fascinating to get into it. So, okay, have a great Shabbos.
Take care.
You're the last McCoy. You're the one who stuck it
Oh,
out. Only one that stuck it out.
Hold
All right, Kotiv, all the best.